So moving to the Merseyside context, because you're going to be there in 2 years' time. Welcome to Liverpool. When the European group goes, this is where we're going to go walk to. We're going to do a walking tour of Toxteth. Merseyside, and I know that there are people here from Liverpool, so please do pitch in if you think I'm wrong. I've lived in Liverpool for 10 years now, and I absolutely love it. But there are serious structural issues, and in terms of economic distribution, as we know, there's a bit of the north-south divide, which coming from Northern Ireland was a surprise to me because we had a very different north-south divide. But anyway, still the economic distributions in north-south divide. These are just different pieces that I took some pictures of. This is from my work, and you can see the nice CCTV. It's quite the urban centre, as I think Sam had discussed in the plenary. The urban centre is very much sort of the urban panopticon, and I know Roy Coleman and Joe Sim and stuff have done a lot more about that. Massive areas, I think, am I right or am I wrong? Over 25% of unemployment now in Liverpool. And also our regeneration project. Yeah, massive amounts of worklessness. So this is some graffiti in the park that I take my dog for a walk in. And this is their neighbourhood improvement works. Now, unfortunately, the lighting isn't fantastic, but essentially what this is flattened land. So their neighbourhood improvement works was a little bit problematic if it was your neighbourhood, in that they basically ran out of funding. The idea was the 2008, I've given myself 5 minutes left. I've just realised I'm chairman as well. They basically flattened, ran out of funding, and didn't rebuild. So this is the issue of some of the ideas around Merseyside. So the context in itself, which then, there is a point to this, in the indices of deprivation has recently been established as the highest, or the most deprived area in the United Kingdom. In the Church Urban Funds project in 2012, 5 out of the 10 most deprived areas in the United Kingdom are in Merseyside. I live in one of them, and Sam Fletcher lives in another. That is half of the most deprived areas, so places like Anfield, Everton, Toxteth, which I'm sure many of you, even outside of the UK context, will be familiar with. But also, as a key dispersal area, the most recent statistics from ICAR are 2009. 1,375 asylum seekers in supported accommodation. Other areas, other small city centres like Newcastle, for example, 630. Cardiff, a capital city in Wales, 980. There is still a high concentration of people seeking asylum, but also that is just supported. In the ICAR, there is also the idea that there are 25 unsupported, and I think that the asylum organisations would massively contest that, because I know that one local organisation has at least sort of 270 destitute people living locally registered. So that's not a fair reflection. And seriously problematic in Merseyside. Merseyside is cut into different sort of funding areas, and something that I think, and I know that it's not just my research that discusses this, but other research, funding pitching, so small amounts of funding, and then everybody having to literally go tooth and nail for the same pots, which then of course creates segregations and people working together. The reason that where was I going with this? What was the point of this? Merseyside context. Yeah, just bringing in a concept, again, a bit of just from chatting with Sam, the idea of the I am Spartacus of oppression. Yeah. Everybody in times anyway, in terms of excluded groups, vulnerable groups, marginalised groups, there are already massive amounts of issues, obviously with regard to support, with regard to all these other issues. Recessions then compound that. Funding pitching makes that even worse. And essentially, if you think of the context of propaganda, the changes in seeing asylum as the other, the criminal, the illegal, then what ends up, there is no way that the focus or is on asylum-seeking people. That is just further marginalisation. If there's going to be people who are in local groups already experiencing worklessness, already experiencing violences and inequalities, then asylum seekers who are already demonised, they just don't get a look in, essentially, is the point that I'm making. Which brings me to asylum in the States, and I'm giving myself literally like 2 more minutes, and then I'm not going to be able to tell you about my plans. Loads of common mistakes, inconsistencies in documentation, how documentation is determined, and how appeals go through, and everything else as I've already said. Non-acceptance or dismissal of medical legal evidence, so people not even waiting for medical legal evidence whenever they've already made their rejection, already rejected the asylum seeker's account. All right. So I want to then move to think about intersections of state violence and structural violence. Now we know, thinking back to the continuum, in terms of state violence, there are state violences committed in areas of conflict, on borders, during forms of migration, but also thinking, this, by the way, state violence is not my main area of talking, which is, I want to basically pull in people's feedback, please, about establishing the ideas of state and structural violence. Structural violence, if you think about Galtung's 1969 discussions around what structural violence is, not allowing access to things like medicine, food, accommodation, basic rights, and we can talk about human rights or we can talk about civil liberties. Either way, they're established and they are accessible, as Dave said yesterday in his presentation. If the 1% didn't have their legal loopholes to get taxes across to wherever else they want them to go, it could have sorted out many of the issues of recession sort of straight off. So in terms of thinking of state and structural violence, it could exist. There is money there, but it's not going to happen, is it? While we've got the likes of Tony Blair, George Bush and Rupert Murdoch walking around, we might as well laugh at the idea of adherence to international legislations or policies. Violence by state actors and protectors, but then asylum in the UK as something that compounds the impacts of violence that people have already experienced and compounds the perhaps mental health or physical or psychological issues or problems that people already have had, and then perpetuates further forms of violence in not allowing access to things that could actually help people through processes of survival. I'm going to have to stop there, but basically what I was going to say is, what I want to do in the future is to think about a project that doesn't recognise, it moves toward, and I don't want to sound really sort of postmodern stuff, but also not to discredit identities, but also recognise people's identities as fluid and changeable in their processes of conflict, forced migration and asylum. And it was actually last year at the European group, I think Monish Bhatia and I had just presented, and we talked about UK context, and the next person who got up to spoke said, but in Greece, it is so much worse. You think it's bad in the United Kingdom. Absolutely. I bet you it's absolutely appalling. But back to the I am Spartacus of oppression. If we think about people who are leaving Afghanistan or Syria or any of these other areas, Iraq, Iran, all of these areas of conflict, then they weren't dropped by a stork in Merseyside. Many people have come through Greece, through Italy, through France, and experienced different forms of exclusion at different points. So what I want to think about is moving like an oral history project to talk to people at different areas and different points of Europe to push the agenda of continuums of violence in people's lives, the importance of continuums and fluid identities in people's lives, but also that then has to have responses, and the responses should come from people from below who know what responses work. So I'm going to shut up now, stop talking, and move on to the next speaker. So, thank you.